Welcome gamers! Today we are following up our Artisan analysis video and talking specifically about the Gathering class. If you missed the Artisan analysis video, check it out because I covered Artisan progression, Artisan gear, and surveying, which I will be referencing multiple times throughout this video. The 5 professions in the Gathering class are fishing, herbalism, hunting, lumberjacking, and mining. I want to point out that there is not a ton of information out there about these professions, but I will do my best on exploring everything that we do know and everything that we can assume based off what we know. So a lot of information in this video will be just pure speculation based off conclusions that I've drawn. Now with that out of the way, let's dive in. First off, let's talk about everyone's favorite profession in any MMO, fishing. There will be 3 types of fishing that players can participate in: coastal or lake fishing, small game fishing, and deep sea fishing. Each type of fishing will require a different tool for the job, which is something that all 5 gathering professions will have in common. So let's take a look at coastal fishing. In this Ashes of Creations Artisan livestream, we got a glimpse of what all the different tools might be. This appears to be a net, which makes sense to me that it would be mainly used for coastal fishing. The net would allow for players to fish in any water, but players would not be able to reap the rewards of obtaining deep fish in the ocean if they are just simply using a net. The fish obtained from a net, I assume, will only be common rarity, like a bluegill or a crabfish, and have a chance at catching slightly higher quality fish in that small game fishing category. The next piece of fishing equipment looks like a regular rod, which would primarily be used for small game fishing. I assume this type of fishing will take place anywhere players would typically use their net, but would have a greater chance of catching higher quality fish by casting their line farther offshore. There will be a wide use case for fishing that extends to other professions, such as using the materials to help craft trophies for the carpentry crafting profession, clothing and costumes for the tailoring or leather crafting professions, potions for the alchemy processing profession, and food for the cooking processing profession. The fact that fish have a direct connection to this many other types of professions probably mean that fishing will be very lucrative if players can follow the trends of supply and demand. The last piece of fishing equipment that we see in this clip here appears to be a harpoon for deep sea fishing. This sort of fishing will require actually going out on a boat and using expensive fishing lures. There will be some sort of minigame associated with catching deep fish. Based off this specific quote from Steven, I assume that the other 2 types of fishing will just be a click and wait. I think deep sea fishing will have a tension minigame like seen in New World, where players need to keep their lines in a certain sweet spot to avoid the line breaking or the fish getting loose. I would personally like this type of minigame to be made for small game fishing as well, while having a slightly more complex minigame for the deep sea fishing, where players may need to play this tension minigame and possibly move their boat with the fish to help tire it out for those large legendary catches. In another Discord message from Steven Sharif in 2020, he said that fishing will be community resource nodes until depleted and spawned elsewhere. This probably means that there will be some visual marker or indicator, like fish jumping out of the water, that tells players to fish in certain places. So using the surveying system will be crucial to reach these fishing spots before other players, if the surveying system applies the fishing like it does for the other gathering professions. All the way back in 2018 in a Q&A, Steven expressed an interest in having fishing tournaments that would yield rewards to players that catch the best fish over a certain amount of time. I do not think that we've heard anything about fishing tournaments apart from this brief interaction, but it would be a cool addition to the game if it holds true. On freeholds, there will be a building called a fishery available for construction. A fishery is a workstation that will spawn fish and can actually be fished at. The blueprint used when crafting a fishery is what determines the type of fish that will spawn. So this would be a great way to generate specific fish materials for other processing or crafting professions. The last thing to note for the fishing profession is there will be fish available in the Underrealm. But these fish may be unique and potentially very dangerous, where a group of fishermen would need to party up to catch them. There will be group-based gathering in Ashes of Creation, so I think this would be a unique experience that I touched on earlier, where players would need to work together by one player harpooning a fish and another player piloting the boat along with the fish as the first one plays that tension minigame. Next up, let's talk Herbalism. We haven't seen too much about Herbalism, but it seems to be a very straightforward click and wait gathering profession. A unique part about Herbalism is that there will be seasonal herbs, and seasons will last for about 1 to 2 weeks at a time. This inherently makes certain herbs or plants more valuable because they are only available about 25% of the time if a biome experiences the 4 seasons equally, such as this gloomy pros that only grows during the winter. The 3 types of tools that we see in the Herbalism toolset looks to be a scythe, a sickle, and shears. I imagine larger crops like corn or wheat would require the scythe, but in the Freehold livestream, we see Steven using a sickle to gather these resources. Maybe higher quality crops will require a scythe, or maybe the scythe will have a different purpose altogether that's specific to group-based gathering. An idea that I had for the Herbalism group-based gathering is that players could interact with a plot of land that's about 10 by 10 feet containing weeds or tall grass. The scythe would be used to clear this small plot and would require 2 players interacting with it. This could yield an abundant amount of random Herbalism resources. The sickle will be the basic herbologist gathering tool, as we have seen it gather numerous plants and crops already in developer update livestreams. I think the surveying system will play an important role for Herbalism because it can reveal seasonal resource nodes, so players can map out areas to gather certain plants in preparation for an upcoming season. We know that surveying will locate seasonal resource nodes, but it is unclear if that means out-of-season resource nodes can be detected. I think this would be a cool and unique use case for surveying that's more specific to Herbalism. The third Herbalism tool, shears, I originally thought to be for shearing sheep, but that does not make much sense to fall under the Herbalism category. So this tool looks to be more specific to gardening shears, and I think they'll be used to harvest small and delicate Herbalism resources like flowers or very small herbs, where a sickle or scythe would probably damage those resources. On freeholds, we know that crops can be grown and harvested, but I do not think we know if herbs or plants can be planted in freeholds. If this is possible, it would create an avenue for interdependency among farmers and herbologists, and I think it would be cool to see out-of-season resources being populated this way if freeholds could create something like a greenhouse. The Herbalism profession will be useful in supplying resources to the alchemy and cooking processing professions, and if seeds could be harvested as well, then the farming profession would benefit from Herbalism also, as we just discussed on freeholds. On to the next gathering profession, hunting. There's very little information on what hunting will entail, so I will do my best on interpreting what very little information we have. I think that each of these 3 different tool sets will behave very differently from one another, which would make this the most unique gathering profession in my opinion. The first set of tools we see is a hamhock, which I assume will be used for taming, and Steven confirmed taming is a subtask of hunting. I think this hamhock is just a representation for a large amount of different baits that could be used in gaining trust from different types of creatures across Vera. A hamhock could be used for taming carnivorous animals, and vegetables could be used for herbivores. I think it would be cool for there to be some sort of minigame in the process of taming where players would need to trial and error which types of baits can be used for taming specific animals, such as using Arctic rabbit bait for Arctic wolves or horse bait for dire wolves. If incorrect bait is used, it could just lower the chance of taming. Taming animals is the prerequisite for the animal husbandry system that's used to domesticate those animals and turn them into combat pets or mounts. I imagine that many players will opt into using their 2 Grandmaster specializations in these 2 professions, as they have a direct connection to each other, and the animal husbandry system is one of the most unique systems I've seen in any MMO that we will talk about in our next Artisan Processing Professions video. The second set of tools is just a plain looking hunting bow. The conclusion that I came to for this hunting bow tool is that economic nodes house a unique building called a market, and markets allow access to a hunter's post, which is where players can accept bounties to hunt creatures across Vera. So I think that it makes sense that the hunting bow gathering tool will essentially be a certificate that allows players access to accepting higher tier bounties for greater rewards as they progress through this profession. These rewards may be pelts used for leather armor crafting or animal meat used for cooking. The last tool set looks to be a bear trap. Again, there's very little available information about hunting, but I could be wrong about the ham hock, and this bear trap could be the tool used for taming animals, and the ham hock could be a representation for harvesting meat from animals after killing them. But if this were the case, I think some sort of skinning knife would have been a more appropriate tool to be displayed. So I think this bear trap gathering tool will be the primary means for harvesting meat and fur from animals. Or I could just be entirely wrong about the functions of all these hunting tools, so let's just move on and figure it out when Alpha 2 comes along. What we do know for sure is there will essentially be animal resource nodes, meaning there may be a flock of sheep that spawn and can be interacted with, just like how a player may interact with and harvest corn. If this process is intended to be the primary way players gather in the hunting profession, then every profession we talk about in this video would have a very similar process for gathering the bulk of materials. Lumberjacking will be a very straightforward gathering profession. Our first toolset is a logging axe. The majority of trees out in the world of Vera will be static resource nodes that respawn in the same location after being chopped down to obtain lumber. Gathered lumber can be transported to a lumber milling station and be processed into timber, which is another processing specific profession. Trees can be influenced by changes in their environment, like seen here, where this oak tree becomes corrupt and requires a level higher than a lumberjacking novice to be able to chop it down. Higher tier resources like this are not planned to be static resource nodes, and they will spawn in randomized locations or in locations that are reacting to certain world events. So once the corruption is gone from the land we see here, then the corrupted oak would no longer appear here either. The next toolset is a saw. There may be solo use cases for the saw in gathering certain resources, but I believe the 2022 Gathering Developer Update livestream is where we first heard about 2-player gathering mechanisms, and the saw was the tool mentioned that would be utilized for this purpose. Ashes of Creation is trying to promote group-based gathering, just how players would group up to go take on a dungeon. So players would need an incentive to participate in group gathering parties compared to solo gathering. I imagine an incentive for large trees that require 2 players to saw down would be that they yield a very large amount of lumber to fill out player resource bags quicker, or have a higher chance of obtaining rarer resources. This would also be another great use case for the surveying system, where players can group up and find these large resource nodes quicker to save themselves some time. The last toolset is something that I don't think has been mentioned anywhere, nor the type of resource it would gather has been mentioned either. But this looks to be a tree tap for collecting sap. I feel like collecting sap will be a rarer resource and come from very specific trees that have multiple uses, like the fishing community resource nodes we talked about earlier. Other professions that I think could utilize tree sap would be alchemy, cooking, carpentry, or jewel crafting. The last gathering profession currently planned for Ashes of Creation is mining. This will be another fairly straightforward profession with a few options to mix up the monotony of just swinging your pickaxe with different tool sets. Speaking of pickaxes, this is the first tool set that will be used for the majority of a player's mining needs. Ashes of Creation will have rocks out in the world with no indicator of what's inside until a player cracks it open. To avoid wasting time mining random rocks and obtaining useless materials, players will want to use the surveying system to find which rock resource nodes contain the materials they want. There will be resource nodes that player can see and know what's inside without having to mine it, like the basalt we see Steven gathering here. Although I think rocks will be much more abundant in the world and may be a quicker route to obtaining specific resources through surveying compared to manually searching for specific nodes like basalt. The second tool set here is a panning basket, which is the tool that would be used in group-based gathering. Just like how I speculated with group gathering for lumberjacking, I think there will be limited areas within streams or water close to mountains that will allow for players to work together to obtain an abundant amount of resources. And in the real world, panning is more specific to gathering gold or gems, so I think it would make sense that there is a higher chance to obtain rarer resources when mining this way. This third tool set looks to be another mining axe, but if you look closer, you can see some ridges at the bottom that look to be consistent with a drill. So I think this last tool is an old-fashioned hand drill. In a 2017 livestream, we heard the Ashes of Creation team talking about a mine, which I think would be one of those community resource nodes that I mentioned will occur within the fishing profession and potentially other professions as well. I think this hand drill will play some sort of role in excavating through a mine, or it would just be the tool used to interact with a mine to gather resources without actually needing to delve into that mine and explore. This concludes my video about the 5 artisan gathering professions. Do you agree with my assumptions on some of these tool sets and group-based gathering mechanics, or do you have some theories of your own? Let me know in the comments below if you have any ideas you would like implemented for these gathering professions as well. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next Processing Professions video.